The MIW Disruptive podcast is sponsored by Mentorch. Mentorch is a social development network for mentorship. Go to mentorch.app to seek knowledge and leave a legacy.
Welcome to the Disruptive podcast by Minority Innovation Weekend. Minority Innovation Weekend is a weekend summit dedicated to aiding minority innovators launch tech-focused startups, exploring emerging technologies, and showcasing tech startups that have a minority founder or co-founder. During each episode, we will discuss innovation, news about tech startup, as well as the startup ecosystem, and interview people of color throughout the startup ecosystem. Welcome to the MIW Disruptive podcast hosted by Sir Walter and Jerome. Today we are joined by such a phenomenal woman in here. She's a product manager. She's also very familiar with AI and blockchain. She's a public speaker. She is founder of Pinnacle Hustle. I'm talking about Griffin. How are you?
I'm doing phenomenal. It's Juneteenth. I'm enjoying the day. I'm really excited to be here with you on this Juneteenth. This is, I think, a great way for me to be spending today. So I'm just super happy to be here.
Yes, we're happy to have you here as well.
That's awesome. Hey, let's go ahead and get started. Tell us about Pivot, Hustle, and Grow. You're a founder of this company, this effort. Tell us more.
Yeah, so Pivot Grow Hustle really came out of my own kind of Pivot Grow Hustle. So I'm a product manager and I wanted to move into more emerging tech type of work in product management. And I was really interested in AI and interested in blockchain. And I saw those things as, you know, the technologies of the future. And I really thought to myself, I'm like, okay, so if, at the time I was like, if the company I'm at now doesn't do any of these things and they're not going to pay to teach me any of these things, and they're not going to let me do any of these things, how am I supposed to get those jobs in the future? How am I supposed to work on those technologies? Because, you know, there's already job requirements that are saying, oh, you need this many years experience working with AI, this many years experience working with blockchain. I'm like, what product managers have like 8 years experience working in AI without being a developer, you know? So, you know, I pivoted in terms of like taking classes, figuring out a path into getting to work with those emerging technologies. And a lot of people I know saw that transformation. And I was, I'll say, very, like say, quote unquote, vocal in terms of sharing in the digital space that transformation. And I had a lot of people that would come to me and say, hey, Ann, I need career advice, or I'm really interested in doing this or that. And I realized, you know, at some point I was like, I've helped nearly 100 people with their careers, whether it was a career transition or they're trying to upskill. And I was like, yeah, I was like, there's something of value here and I can scale and help a lot more people if I, you know, turn this into classes and teach people skills that they can reuse throughout their career. And, you know, have that be something where, you know, because everything changes so quickly now. My parents worked for the same place for 40 years of their career. That's not going to be the case for me, and it hasn't been the case for me. So for me, Pivot Grow Hustle is really about taking those skills I've learned through my own career pivot and teaching that to other professionals, whether that they're trying to go into a new industry, just trying to get a new job, or they're really trying to upskill for those jobs of the future so they can be relevant, you know, when they're like, you know, they're not forced into early retirement at like 52.
Gotcha. So you mentioned earlier, and as well as in the introduction, that you're very enthusiastic about blockchain. So yes. What is blockchain and what are the components that make blockchain?
Yeah, so one of the things is usually when I tell people I've worked in the blockchain industry, the first thing they say is what? And then I say, have you heard of Bitcoin? Most of the people I've talked to have heard of Bitcoin. And the way I like to describe it is Bitcoin is to blockchain what you think of internet or email to the internet, whereas email is an application of the internet, correct? Email is not the entire internet. The internet can do a lot of things. And you have to think that way about Bitcoin is one application of blockchain. And then there's blockchain. So from there, what exactly is blockchain? And so kind of the theory, the most famous thing in terms of the most famous application of blockchain right now is Bitcoin, because that's like the universal thing. You ask people what it is, they know what it is. And specifically, the Bitcoin blockchain allows for, basically think of it as a public ledger that anyone and everyone can see. Anyone on it can make an edit to it. But once you actually make an edit to it, or not make an edit to it, like actually like record to it, once you record to it, everyone can see that transaction, but no one can go back and edit it. So if you want to like go back and update it later, you have to have like another transaction later in the blockchain, like, or later in the chain of transactions that says like, oh, we previously made a mistake. And so that thing you saw earlier in the chain is actually this, but you can't actually go and edit or change that. And the best way I've heard described is by Samson Williams, who's a professor at University of New Hampshire Law School, and also Columbia. He also is an instructor at Columbia University. He specifically talks about it as a group text message. If we have a group text message between all of us, and I send you a text message saying like, I owe you $20, all of us can see that. None of us can go back and delete my one message. I can't, we all saw it. So there's kind of this trust of like, then you kind of may send another text message saying, hey, I received your $20, right? None of this can be edited and can change. We can send more text messages to clarify, but none of that can be edited or deleted, and everyone has the access to be able to see those text messages.
All right, let's talk about more of this blockchain. Are there any security, if I were to implement a product, are there some security concerns I should be aware of?
Yeah, so it depends on what your definition of security is, because there's a couple things. And I think we'll get to this later, but there's public blockchains and there's private blockchains. In terms of being able to be hacked, a public blockchain is likely to be more secure because it's distributed. There's harder to get control enough of the network to be able to attack it or try to change things if everything is distributed across a lot of different kind of nodes in the system. But the thing is that you want to talk about is also it's a public blockchain. So there are certain things that, are recorded to the blockchain, they're hashed, but if you knew enough information, you could kind of figure out what information is in that hash. So the thing is there are certain details where you think about PII or other things in terms of like, who is this person and how much did they make this transaction for? From certain GDPR aspects, blockchain wouldn't be secure based on what they're talking about in terms of, how secure certain data needs to be about you. But in terms of hackability, to my knowledge, no one has hacked a public blockchain. People have hacked crypto exchanges, which is different. Because the exchange itself is not the blockchain, but actually hacking that blockchain itself has not happened.
Gotcha. And what is GDPR exactly?
Yeah, so GDPR is, it's specifically a European regulation that governs specifically data privacy and your data rights. Because right now, if you gave me your name and your email, there are things where it's like, there's, in most states in the United States, there's not a lot of rules about like how long I can keep your information. There might be certain things where it's like, I could maybe like sell your data without your consent to somebody else. There's a lot of things I can do with that data that, as long as it's not your financial information, I'm not really held accountable. And even if it's your financial information, look at companies where, they've had issues where people's financial information got out, and maybe there's like a lapse of trust, but there's really not anything like sincerely bad that comes down from the government or some other like ruling body. GDPR actually makes it so that the European Union government actually will send you a pretty like hefty fine if you're found in terms of violation of these laws. So specifically, if you're a European citizen, and I'm also, even if I'm not in Europe, if you're a European citizen and I collect your data, and I am then go and sell this data, and I don't tell you that I was going to sell your data, then that is considered, that's considered a violation of GDPR. Or specifically, if it's like you give me your data and then, you're inactive for like 10 plus years, and please excuse the siren going by. I'm in New York City, so you know, our numbers are going down for COVID-19, but every now and then we get some more ambulance sirens.
I got you.
But basically there's other things in terms of that regulation, where if I'm like just keeping your information indefinitely on a server and I'm not even using it and you're not even using my service, and then somebody hacks into it, there's a question of like, okay, so why were you holding on to that information? Why did you need that? You just really kind of created this like, you know, honeypot that just attracted people to try to get these people's information. So GDPR covers a number of situations in terms of data privacy and protecting people's data. And California passed a similar law, and there's a lot of conversations around that happening here. But then there's the other things. You guys all about innovation. There's that kind of aspect of, if you put too much regulation in place, how much regulation is too much regulation, that starts hindering innovation, that makes people nervous. They're like, well, if I do this, then it's actually like, you know, it's too expensive to engage the lawyers, it's too expensive to do this, to really have a startup that's going to do innovative things that might involve that data. But at the same time, you know, there also needs to be that accountability of what happens, you know, when, if I'm a company, if I'm doing stupid things and then you're negatively impacted because I don't know how to securely handle data.
Gotcha.
Generally speaking, how does adding blockchain technology to a company add business value?
So that's a really interesting question. And I did a whole course on this last summer through O'Reilly called Business Applications of Blockchain. And the short answer is, just adding blockchain to your company doesn't actually add any value unless there is a specific thing where adding the blockchain is going to solve it better than the existing technology, right? So you have to think about, is there a situation in which blockchain is a better solution in a way where either it'll like save you money, or your, you know, whoever your customers are going to value that for some reason, because that having that type of like public ledger or that type of technology, if you're using like a private blockchain, you know, gives them some additional edge or benefit to what they're trying to achieve. You know, so why should they use blockchain instead of a private database? Because, you know, if you go to IBM is, you know, they'll let you use their private blockchain, but there's fees, you know, to do that. But then there's also going to be fees to hire IBM consultants to come help you implement that blockchain. And you could use a public one, but then now we start getting into those data regulations, especially if we're talking about large, you know, international companies. And also just, it can be very expensive to do transactions on the blockchain as of now. So you have to kind of weigh all of these pros and cons. So what I saw working in the blockchain space is you had companies that have really innovative ideas, that were doing really interesting things and doing things around music rights in the blockchain space, and basically trying to make it so that not just music rights, but there are a lot of different applications, and they were really interesting in terms of trying to give everyone a little piece of ownership and decentralizing ownership and these kind of things. But the thing is the average consumer, while they might like that as an idea, what they really care about is that if I go to buy music, it's really easy on my phone, and I do 2 clicks and I can stream it, or it downloads to my device, you know? And so as much as like people get really excited when you tell them it's using blockchain, does that actually make them hit the button? And you start also looking at some of these public blockchains, because there's this idea of consensus, right? Where all the different parts of the, you know, again, all the servers are distributed, all the nodes are distributed. They all have to come to a consensus that this transaction is valid. That takes time. And so if you're used to, you know, a transaction taking a split second, and now you're waiting something like 30 seconds for a transaction to happen, you know, you as a consumer, you're like, I liked this idea of, you know, this shared, you know, ownership or this kind of thing. But they're like, but it's so easy to just stream it on Spotify, you know? So really the thing is, people care, customer cares more about that end. What is the real thing that they're like, that end goal that they want? Like, what is the problem they're trying to solve? They don't actually care about the technology. So you really have to be careful, because you can end up spending a lot of time, a lot of money and essentially like adding blockchain to your business and have it be a big like waste of investment for something because you didn't really understand how that really solved your customer's problem. And it's still a new technology. It's still early days. And it's kind of like there's certain things when the internet was new, right? Where people were just like, I'd rather not do this because dial-up internet takes forever. There were certain things that in terms of solving the problem, just doing it in real life or doing it over the phone, right? Would you have taken a class online during dial-up internet?
No.
You probably would have been like, I'd rather, if I had to do a telephone course and we all just got on the same line or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably something that made a lot more sense. And so you really have to think about like, what does your customer really want? And that's, I think, a core piece of product management. You really have to know your customer, and you have to really think about how am I solving that customer's problem in a way that also benefits me as a business.
Gotcha. So like, which blockchain standard do you use for your technology?
So I'm specifically not working on a blockchain product right now. I worked at OpenLaw previously. They're in the blockchain space. They're a legal tech company that leverages the blockchain using smart contracts, and they specifically are on Ethereum. So I come from like the Ethereum universe, but I'm pretty familiar. My course, Business Applications Blockchain, kind of walks through the different blockchains, both public and private, in terms of even talking about like which companies are using them and why specifically they may have chosen those solutions for what they're building. Yes.
All right. I want to go back a little bit, back to Pivot, Grow, Hustle. Typically, the people that you're consulting, do they typically go on to start a business, or they just kind of start a new career, or both?
Yeah. So I'll say Pivot, Grow, Hustle is really new. It's something where, to be honest, it was birthed out of COVID-19. I'll say like my 9 to 5 is in the travel space. Fortunately, like knock on wood, we're still doing okay. Not excellent, clearly, because travel is not the thing that people necessarily want to do right now. But it was something where I was like, hey, I've been doing this for a really long time. I've thought about, doing classes. I'm going to do this now. But people in terms of before Pivot, Grow, Hustle that I've helped, a lot of them, it was a career transition. And right now I'm also I'm also helping people in terms of also if they're thinking about doing, getting out of 9 to 5, but right now that's more of helping people kind of figure out what that is. And then usually I pass them on to other resources. Like right now I'm actually working with somebody, her name is Shantavia Johnson. She is, she's an attorney, but she also has been running her own business for years. And so she has something called Brand and Business Academy, where she helps take people from that concept stage, right, in terms of like what they think their business is going to be, to actually figuring out how their business is going to be structured, how it's going to make money. And then also figuring out, because she has a legal background, she specifically comes from IP law. So she also helps people figure out what resources they need to actually protect their intellectual property. And so that's another reason why I'm in her course, because I'm figuring out how to protect my intellectual property right now. And so it's really, really great. So a lot of the people I work with are usually just like either upskilling or doing a transition in their career. But I also help kind of very early stage when people are thinking like, hey, I know I don't like what I do at work, but I'm kind of want to get out of 9 to 5, but they're really trying to figure out how to prioritize which of their skills they want to leverage. And then usually I kind of pass them on to other resources that have been doing this a really long time, like Shantavia Johnson.
Gotcha. So you're the Chief Product and Curriculum Officer for Tech 2025. What exactly is that?
Yeah, so Tech 2025 is a community, and it's a platform, and is a bit also of a consulting service as well. It is founded by the amazing Charlie Oliver. Charlie and I have been friends for it's like 5 or 6 years now. It actually started because I just kept going to all the events, and I was just really, for me, it was like, again, this is when I first started going to Tech 2025 events, I was trying to learn more about like emerging technology. So really it's like the tagline is figuring out the future together. And so it's a bit of like, applying futurism into like, what does this actually look like for the average person? Because people love to talk a good game about AI and blockchain, and they're like, oh, it's so exciting. And then you realize you're like, oh, wow, this is actually really boring because it's just technology, right? Like, what does it look like when it's applied? And so, Tech 2025 really explores that, both with companies who want help figuring that out and also individuals who work in a company, because that was really the reason why I started going to some of the events that they have for just regular people, because I was like, I think for me, it's like coming from a background where it's like my parents worked at the same company for like 40 years, and having also seen that company lay people off and, go through its own phases of growth and retraction. Realizing that you can be, when I talked earlier, you can be like 50 years old and your company is just like, thank you, but we don't need you anymore. Yeah. And you're back on the job hunt. And I definitely saw people with entire PhDs in chemistry and engineering and those kind of things struggle in a decent economy to get another job. And some of it is ageism, and there's a lot of other things involved, but realize that, while being a specialist is great, the new economy that we're moving to, especially as there's increased automation, kind of we go into this like fourth industrial revolution, your ability to kind of keep up with these things and change and transform is very critical. It's very vital. I don't have the luxury of staying with like one specialty through my whole career, from the time that I graduated college to whenever it is I'm going to retire. And so Tech 2025 really helped me with that. And so, it's a great organization. And again, the tagline is like figuring out the future together. And we're expanding and working a lot more also with like enterprise companies and other things as well. And just like also helping figure out what a post-COVID world looks like, especially as we're seeing companies that are trying to use more automation because of what's going on, because people can't be in person, or, Zoom can't be the answer to everything. And when we go back to quote unquote normal, there are going to be certain things that just are not going to be the normal that we used to know.
Is there something significant about the 2025 portion of Tech 2025?
Yes. So also, I apologize. I'm gonna butcher it, but so Charlie will explain it a lot better than me, and I should have looked it up before I came. But basically, 2025 is supposed to be a year, like a predicted year, when like we reach some sort of like pivot point in the kind of this fourth industrial revolution. And again, like Charlie would explain it like way better than me, so I apologize to you, Charlie, in advance. But that's really supposed to be this inflection point. We're actually coming up on it like very, very soon. It's like maybe one Olympics and a year away, if you think about it that way. And so that was really why she came up with it. And the part of the reason why she also came up with that title is that she has another company that she runs called Served Fresh Media. And she has people in the C-suite coming to her and saying, Charlie, what are we supposed to do with AI? Am I supposed to like implement it in my business? Am I supposed to do this? And these were like big companies. They weren't, a company of two people. And they didn't know. And she's like, if you guys don't know, what is everyone else supposed to do? Like you guys are the people who are showing up on panels talking about how AI is the future and AI is this and, emerging technology, blockchain, that. And you guys are asking me, then, she's like, then we're all kind of screwed, right? Because she's like, how are the people in your organization supposed to prepare if you guys don't even know what your strategy is for this? And so that was part of the reason why she, focused on kind of that prediction in terms of that 2025 being a pivot point, because she was like, we need to kind of get to a place where we're ready for it, because right now, or even now, we're definitely not ready for it. And even I'll say pre-Trump administration, we still had a long way to go. And there were all these kind of initiatives that the Obama administration was already working on for AI and other emerging technologies that kind of just evaporated and were completely deleted off of the White House website when Trump came into office.
Gotcha. So you mentioned a couple of times the fourth industrial revolution. What industries do you believe that will consist of?
I think it's going to touch everything, right? I think the industrial revolution that everybody thinks about as the industrial revolution is one that comes down to manufacturing. It just became a lot faster, easier, more efficient, and less human labor intensive to manufacture things. But this fourth one is going to involve manufacturing. It's going to involve healthcare. It's going to involve possibly like, you know, how we shop at the grocery store, like how we interact at like a fast food restaurant, pretty much anywhere where, you know, technology can be used, where we're seeing like kind of, because people always think about this as the web 3.0 technologies, right? Where we're talking about AI, blockchain, other things like AR, virtual reality. And you start realizing that things like the facial recognition and all these things are tied into it. And you're going to see automation of people's jobs, right? And people always think about, you know, oh, like my job could never be automated. And it's really interesting because if you really think about the number of things you do in your day job that are repeatable, that if you're like, oh, if I could just get like an intern to pass this part of my job off to, you know, there's actually a lot of our jobs, even as people who, you know, work in STEM fields, that can be automated. It's not saying that everyone's job can be 100% automated, but there is some percentage, right, of your job that can be automated. And back to talking about Tech 2025. So Charlie, you know, had this idea for an event specifically focusing on, you know, automation and the jobs and talking about how that impacts jobs in the future. And this really interesting thing was we had a room full of people and we're like, how many people here think that your job will be automated in the next like 5 to 10 years? And like no one raised their hand. And that's alarming because it frankly is just untrue that our jobs can't be automated. Maybe there's parts where it's like we will still do them, you know, but there's going to be things where we're going to be working with machines more. There are people who said that they would prefer to work with a machine over working with a human. And I mean, if you've worked with some really toxic humans, and also I'll say like, you know, I would say like, you know, especially as Black people, you know, there's times where we're just like, yeah, maybe the robot would be better because there'd be less microaggressions, even though it gets into, again, like, you know, the robot probably have all these like microaggressions programmed into it, unfortunately. But, you know, there's a lot of things where you're like, yeah, you know, some days maybe I would rather work for a robot. So, you know, it's going to really involve all industries. People have said like healthcare is going to look the most different because right now we have these machines that are massive that are going to maybe be, I know the people on the podcast can't see this, but like, you know, the size of like a small box or something. You know, it's really going to transform our experiences. And also there's the whole debate about how much of this transformation leads to new jobs and how much it takes away jobs. And that's where you start getting into the debate of universal income and why some people were really into Andrew Yang's and his you know, universal income platform.
It's interesting. You touched on AI's computer vision, for instance, image recognition. Are there any other ethical situations we should kind of be concerned about as we're going forward towards this fourth industrial revolution?
I would there's a lot. There's definitely a lot. And you start even thinking about what Amazon is doing now, right? Amazon has a lot of robots and automation in their warehouses. And some of those robots and some of that automation is actually to watch the humans. And you think, and there's things where it's like, those people know that their bathroom breaks are being timed. Those people know that like there's certain aspects of, I think Amazon's going to start implementing things where they're going to track like that people are social distancing in the warehouse. So it's like, okay, so what happens if that, you know, if for some reason you're just trying to go about your job and you have to do something where you get close to someone, like how is that going to be handled if it's like a machine, if it's just like a bunch of data points versus being able to actually to like talk to a human and try to appeal to logic. And I'll say AI is riddled with, you know, these things. And I think one of the first talks I ever gave at a conference was specifically about how AI technology and bias in AI technologies impacts communities of color. And especially one of the things we focused on was this company called Palantir. Because Palantir came from, you know, they got money from the US government specifically to like try to predict like terrorist attacks in like Iraq and Afghanistan. And you really think this is technology that was really kind of trained on like brown people in a low rights environment. And it basically collects, even without facial recognition, collects a lot of data on people through just publicly, I don't say publicly, but anything you put on the internet, even if you have your Facebook privacy, like kind of controls up really high, you know, there are ways that people can kind of figure that out. There's certain things about your data on your phone that people can track where you are. And Palantir is actually able to construct a really amazingly detailed map about who you are, where you go, and the people you hang out with, to the point where it's like kind of tries to make assumptions about like, oh, like you hang out with these people. We know these people are like in terrorist groups, and so you might be a terrorist, and whether that's true or not, you know, is where, you know, things become problematic. And they took that technology and started using that in the police departments in America within the last like 10 years. And there are certain police departments, like they were using it in New Orleans for, I think, about 6 years. And most of the government of the city of New Orleans didn't even realize that there was a contract with Palantir. I think, like, I don't know if they were paying for it, but definitely it was being used. And there were people who were like sitting in jail who were not really sure how certain, even their lawyers weren't really sure how certain information was obtained. And so it opened up all these questions in terms of, was this an actual like constitutional way to collect information about like racketeering or other type of activity, you know, on this person who's now sitting in jail because of a technology that that person's lawyer wasn't even aware at the time that the police force was using. And so like the NYPD, LAPD, Department of Homeland Security, there's several other police departments that have used Palantir, you know, in the past. And so there's kind of this whole like Pandora's box of things around these technologies and trying to predict, especially when they're predictive, and how they impact us as people of color. And one other thing I'm just going to say in terms of also economics, right? When we're trying to get jobs, you know, like not everyone that wants to be an entrepreneur, not everyone should have to. You know, in terms of if you have a name, like I'll just say like, my name's Ann Griffin, people can't really tell what's going to come out. Usually they assume there's going to be like a white person showing up. You know, Jerome, your name is, you know, a little bit like clearer, you know, in terms of like, I would be very surprised if, you know, someone with like red hair, white skin, and blue eyes walked in with your name. And
you know, I met a white Jerome before in college, and it shocked me. He was like Jewish and had the yarmulke and all. And I'm like, your name's Jerome? What?
That's amazing.
Right,
but when you think about the data that these systems that are even just screening resumes, right, that they're taking in, you know, and they're looking at, okay, well, what people have performed really well at our company before, you know, how many Jeromes were in that data set? You know, there maybe was one Jerome and it was performing really well. But the thing is, when you look across all the Jeromes, you know, and these are things where, you know, when people aren't, you know, guided, they're not educated. You know, these people, you know, I went to engineering school. These are not things that, I mean, I know that by common sense, but there's clearly a lot of people who don't know that. And so there's people who are building things and they don't even understand specifically how that's going to impact people, how it can potentially hurt people. So it, you know, will literally filter out, you know, humans and the robots will literally filter out people, you know, with your name or people like your name and that sort of thing. Like my husband's name, his parents are from Sierra Leone. His name is Senesi. Like he's probably not a white guy, you know? And also people keep wanting to call him sensei. It's, and they're like, I guess it's close. It's not the same, but, you know, it's one of those things where like a lot of the data is trained on like who are in these big corporate environments and these kind of things. And I would say like a book that I would recommend that talks about this is Algorithms of Oppression by Dr. Safiya Noble. It is an amazing book. She's an amazing researcher and just like professor in general. And I met her in real life and she's just a really nice person. But she specifically kind of goes into these algorithms and specifically how, you know, the data they're using, how the fact that like none of these people are even trained to they've never taken a sociology class before, you know, you know, and how that impacts the algorithms that are already in our lives day to day, you know. And sorry, I know this is kind of a long piece, but also just in terms of if you Google professional hair, right, you know, especially for Black women, how, you know, how many times are you going to necessarily see like, you know, protective hairstyles, you know, shown there? Like how often is somebody's afro going to show up in there, you know? So there's a lot of things where we don't necessarily think about it, but you realize like actually every day that you're using technology, there's microaggressions built into it because, you know, there's a whole system around people who either don't care or literally don't know. And then people, once we identify the problem, are just like, well, we don't want to do anything about it. It's not a problem for me.
Gotcha. Which actually is a good lead into this question. So the US government study confirms that most face recognition systems produce false positive when it comes to people of color with the algorithm. So what policies can be implemented to correct this?
Yeah, so this is interesting because there's a big debate, and I'll say the Black and AI community has been calling for a while to stop use of facial recognition in general. And so that is like one approach. There's other people who are saying like, okay, well, China has been using facial recognition for a long time. They have it. They continue to develop it. I don't think they're going to put it down anytime soon. And with our current administration, I don't really see how we would get them to stop. So it's one of those things where we definitely, at minimum, we should definitely not be using it in law enforcement at all, even though it's been used in law enforcement for years now. But it's also like, if we just stop in the United States developing it all, does that mean that people are just going to buy it from China? Or even worse, right, where we're saying like, you know, IBM and these other companies are like, we're going to stop and like, you know, developing it. And I think Microsoft or Amazon was like, we're going to pause on selling it to the police for a year. But you know who we haven't heard from that's really concerning, who has all your photos? Facebook.
Facebook, right.
Facebook, you know, every time you put that filter over your face in your stories, every photo you've uploaded from the very beginning, Facebook actually has been using facial recognition for a really long time. And so I think that I personally think that, you know, from an international standpoint, we can't afford to stop doing research altogether on facial recognition. I think there need to be more standards in terms of, you know, the accuracy on I'll say like across, you know, different backgrounds. And also I will say like gender and like non-gender conforming and all these other things. I would say like Timnit Gebru did a great segment on John Oliver this past weekend that I would recommend anybody seeing. If you just type in John Oliver facial recognition on YouTube, you know, that will come up. I highly recommend watching it. But I think it's something we have to continue to, in terms of research, but in terms of, you know, having ramifications for, you know, misidentifying somebody, and also like, you know, what is the standard for this to be in practice? Like the FDA has rules about this drug has to be this safe for you to put it into practice. If we were to put this into practice into something that was potentially less harmful, which I don't have an example right now, which is again why some people are like calling for the end of facial recognition altogether. You know, like if you were to have it in practice for something that had a valid reason you needed it for, you know, what would be the standards and what would be the ramifications, right, of, you know, misidentifying somebody, because that can easily, you know, ruin someone's life. Like imagine, that's part of the problem also when we're talking about, you know, law enforcement using this, is imagine, you know, it misidentifying, and you guys are Black men, imagine it misidentifying one of you and you getting arrested. And the thing is like, even if you are not charged with anything, the arrest stays on your record. And, you know, going for like future, you know, jobs and that kind of thing. And I think I remember looking at your backgrounds, you guys work in companies that have US government contracts. Like to get another job at another place in terms of that background check, like the background checks for those type of companies, I know are no joke. So these are things where like there are serious ramifications. And I think the company should also feel the serious ramifications, because being like, yeah, this person may never get another job in their field again because like you made an you know, it's not like it's like you need to do something to fix this. And this person either should be compensated, or you guys should have to like compensate to get this removed from their record. Like or like pay them like several $1 million and like buy them like, you know, a brownstone in Harlem. I don't know, but like something, you know, there need to be like those ramifications, like for GDPR, where like getting it wrong and having like real standards like needs to have consequences.
I was watching, I don't know, something online. Someone was selling this T-shirt. It had a special image on it, and it blocked facial recognition. Do you think other technologies will come up to counter facial recognition that might do the similar things?
I think so, but I think at the same time, it's kind of like with anything on, involving technologies, you just have both sides just continuing to build to get around it. Because there was a while where using the Hong Kong protests, there was a while where, they were doing things that were blocking facial recognition, and the companies and agencies in China that were, developing the technology were just basically developing technology to get around this new constraint. And so it becomes kind of like this facial recognition, anti-facial recognition arms race, and so I think there will be technologies that, and like things that people will use who don't want to use it. But then, again, there's always going to be this thing of people who, are going to try to counter it. And going back to that John Oliver, segment they had this past weekend, they also kind of have this thing where it's like, there's this part of London where they like warned you that, hey, you're going to be like tracked and there's facial recognition. And this guy was just like, yeah, I don't want my my picture taken or whatever. I don't even remember what specifically it was. And the police like stopped him and like took his photo anyways. And so and that's the thing, is that was in London, but that there was actually like a similar thing in terms of having like a part of the city. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Hudson Yards project here in New York City. They were going to have a thing too, where they were going to use facial recognition to track shoppers in like kind of the mall part of Hudson Yards, to kind of get information on, shopping data, to see how people, moved around. And maybe it was possibly also a security feature, but they were also trying to get this other data. But I'm like, if even with, you have this little sign, right? It's like, why should you have to do that? Or maybe if you work in that building, do you just have to automatically consent if you want a job that company happens to be in that building? There's all these kind of like problematic things that come up with, you can try to block it, but there's always going to be people who are going to either be like, it's too bad, you're still going to take your photo, or things where it's like, because of your job or other things, you just have to deal with it every day. Because I don't know how many, if you work, let's say at one of those stores at like the Hudson Yards, and they didn't implement it because they got sued, but had they implemented it, how many of those special shirts can you wear walking into work every day, and even then, will your job, you'd have to take it off, because eventually I assume if you're working retail, your job's going to be like, you can't wear that every day. So there's all these things where even if you kind of get outside of the technology, there's things where the lower you are on the rights totem pole, I'm going to take that back. Sorry, totem pole is not the word I'm looking for, but the lower on the rights ladder, we'll say, lower on the rights ladder, the less options you have, both in technology and freedom, to stop these sort of things happening to you.
Gotcha. So, as over the last month or so, the world has been going through social unrest due to numerous murders of unarmed Black men and brown men, Black people and brown people, as well as the systemic racial bias in our society. So what role does tech play in addressing these issues?
Whew. I definitely think that there's a few things, and it's a massive question, and some of that goes back to having policies so that it's not used against us, because there are a lot of areas in our society where these things are being automated against us, and really having policies so that we have transparency into specifically like how effective these things are, how well they're working, being able to like fight these things, and having transparency of like why specifically we were rejected for a job, or why specifically we didn't get housing, or why specifically benefits weren't renewed, and these kind of things. A lot of these things are being automated. Having that transparency into the technology, and not having them just be a big black box. And the other part is, and this is kind of the complicated thing, is like figuring out like, how do we build technologies that actually are built that they can actually help people, or just be like not not harmful. And some of that comes from like having a lot more diverse people in technology actually building them. And actually in terms of, we had more Black people who were in positions of power within AI. We have a lot of Black researchers and that kind of thing. And even for them, their ability to actually get to be the decision maker and say like, no, we're not going to proceed with this, or this is the standard we have to hold it to. I will say to me, it seems like it's been limited. And the other part I'm going to say is really using the technology in terms of like our economic empowerment. It's like we're building it for us, by us, or for us building it for other people, and just building technology companies. Because again, like what I talked about, we're in the fourth industrial revolution. And I'll say like Dr. Calvin Mackey talks about this a lot, where we don't really have a choice. Like if we're not going into STEM, we're not innovating the future. If we're not innovating the future, like we're not really a part of that future. And we're just really like numbers on somebody's, either numbers in like kind of the prison system, or numbers in, and kind of like, I'll say like consumer numbers, in terms of, we're just like a checkbox to see like, great, they bought the new Nikes and they bought this. And I'm not shaming anyone for buying Nikes, because like we all need shoes. But the thing is like having more people, and also getting these businesses properly funded, right? Which I know Arlen Hamilton is doing a lot. And there's a lot of people who are Black in VC that are working on this. Getting these businesses that are tech focused and innovation focused properly funded, so that we actually can have this kind of Black Wall Street that is also working on things that are building the future. Because it is important, how can we have, this Black ecosystem, right? Of kind of like Black economic empowerment, if our iPhones are still made by mostly white people and built in China, and everything that, Zoom, who owns Zoom? Like we're using it right now for this. And it's like, when we look at all the technologies that we're using, they're not owned by us. I would say Calendly is an exception. But we really have to be able to get funded to be able to do that. And oftentimes we're not funded, or we're underfunded. And so we can't actually compete with those other companies that are just being given like millions of dollars and like decades of runway without having a profit, where it's like we're expected in like 3 months to already have like a profitable, super innovative startup. So like these are all really important things, I think, for using technology in the future. I'll say like for our future.
Mm-hmm. Out of the technologies we discussed today, which one do you think is the most important, or they're all equally important in their own right?
I would say, I wouldn't say one is more important than the other. I think certain ones are more, like certain ones, the problems that they create or the solutions that they can create are more imminent. And I would say the one that is the most imminent that you're hearing a lot more about, are around AI, facial recognition, and not just like facial recognition, but just like automation. Because when we look at how many jobs are going to be automated, and you look at how many people of color, just Black people, who don't have a high school diploma, the types of jobs that they work in, and I'll just say those jobs where like you don't necessarily have to be like highly skilled in, those are the first jobs that are predicted to be automated. And when we talk about like a Black economy and that kind of thing, where we can't really just be focused on the people with like 2 college degrees and, work in engineering, it's like, there's a good number of us who maybe don't have a degree and, are working these jobs where they're going to be easily automated. And with COVID, it's really only going to rapidly, increase that. And when we look at how AI is being used by law enforcement, with or without facial recognition, those are things that are imminently impacting us. And again, I said, like, definitely check out Dr. Safiya Noble's book, Algorithms of Oppression. There's another really great book by another Black professor, Ruha Benjamin. Her book, Race After Technology, is a really good one. And this person, she's not a Black author, but it's really, really good in terms of looking at how algorithms are impacting people from a socioeconomic standpoint, is Automating Inequality by Virginia Eubanks. That's also like a really great book. And you learn in terms of even just things like, the book starts out with her talking about how her partner was flagged for insurance fraud because he got mugged like the day after they got a new insurance plan and they didn't want to pay for it. And granted, it's like they're white, so them dealing with that, and they were also able to afford, to like try to put things on credit cards and their communities poured into them. But you really think about, like let's say like, someone who maybe has only a high school diploma or no high school diploma, based in like Alabama, not a good healthcare state, and let's say something, let's say they get beat up by the police like the day after they get an insurance plan, and they get flagged as like this is a risk, like they're just not going to be able to pay it, and so they're probably just not going to be able to get the care that they need. And so this is why I think that like AI is like the most imminent one where we need to be at the table creating it, and we also need to be a part of deconstructing the solutions that have already been created that are hurting us.
Gotcha. And I really enjoyed this conversation we had. Definitely dropped a lot of jewels, a lot of knowledge about technology. Definitely, how can people reach you? How can they, participate in your courses?
Yeah.
Let us know.
Yeah, so there's a couple things. If you're just interested in me for like AI, blockchain in general, there's antgriffin.com. If you're interested in Pivot Grow Hustle, there's pivotgrowhustle.com. I'm Pivot Grow Hustle on both Twitter and Instagram. And also, if you're interested, I'm also teaching a Attractor Dream Job course, because I have like, I'll be honest, like I get Facebook and Amazon and those companies like in my DMs on the regular. So if I'm teaching other people how to get those companies to come to you instead of you chasing them. So if you're interested in the Attractor Dream Job course, that's also on pivotgrowhustle.com.
Gotcha. Yeah. Once again, we definitely want to thank you for being a part of our podcast. Definitely, like I said, so much great knowledge you shared with us, and thank you for taking the time out in your busy day to do so.
I mean, like I said, I wouldn't have it any other way for Juneteenth. Thank you for having me. It's such an honor.
Thanks.
Thank you.
That wraps up this episode of the Disruptive Podcast by Minority Innovation Weekend. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe. Check us out online at www.minorityinnovationweekend.org and connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. MIW 2020 is coming up on Saturday, October 3rd to the 4th, so head on over to www.minorityinnovationweekend.org and register for MIW 2020 today.